I'm Catherine Allgor. I'm the president here at the Massachusetts Historical Society, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to the MHS. And before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge our partner organizations in the planning of this evening's program. This has been truly a team effort, and we could have not have done it without the Fenway Alliance and the Boston Preservation Alliance. We are pleased to have partnered with them and appreciate all of their hard work in bringing this event together. As the first woman to be president of an institution that was founded in 1791, this evening's topic is of special interest to me. It is worth noting that our current exhibition explores the fight for women's suffrage, and it begins with a letter from Abigail Adams to John Adams in 1776, in which he writes, "In the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could." It's funny when Locke says that, nobody laughs. While that letter was written almost 250 years ago, and we sort of start with that, we do end with a coda that looks at today. It was our effort to collect signs and artifacts from the Women's March of 2017. And in that section, there is a video of Jane Swift, who points out that even though it's been 100 years since women won the vote, she's still the only woman who has ever served as governor. However, it is time to look at great strides that have been made, and it is worth noting that there's a long history of women knocking down the barriers and succeeding, particularly in the field of design. This is especially true in Massachusetts, as there have been a number of very successful female designers. To connect our suffrage exhibition to this evening's program, I hope you noticed our little selfie station at the foot of the stairs. The woman standing there with a sign that says, "Can she do it?" is Florence Luscombe, and there she is, peddling her papers. She was born in Lowell in 1887, and when she was little, she heard Susan B. Anthony speak, and she followed her mother's lead in becoming a suffragette and a lifelong activist. She traveled the state campaigning for women's suffrage, and in her 30s, she actually ran for Boston City Council, coming within a 1 percentage point of winning a seat. She continued to be a political activist her entire life, even being the Progressive Party's nominee for governor when she was in her 60s. However, professionally, she was an architect. She graduated from MIT with a degree in architecture, and in 1912 formed a 2-woman firm in Waltham. They specialized in designing public buildings and housing for workers. MIT's prominent design school and legacy of admitting women, including some of this very audience, has certainly been part of the concentration of successful women designers in the area. Lois Lilly Howe was one of the earliest pioneers from this group. Born in Cambridge in 1864, she grew up watching the construction of Harvard's Memorial Hall, which is just down the street from her family home. Her love of design blossomed, and she chose to enroll in MIT rather than the Harvard Annex, as Radcliffe was known at that time. The only woman in her class, she completed the program in 1890. A few years later, she received public recognition with an honorable mention for her design for the Women's Pavilion at the 1896 World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago. And she took the prize money and did exactly what I would do with it. She went to Europe. Well, she took her family, and they toured all the great architectural sites, and they went for a year. In 1893, after she returned home, she opened the first all-female architectural firm in Boston, one of the earliest in America. Her firm grew, and you could see many examples of her buildings throughout the Boston area. And she was active in the profession for 44 years until she retired in 1937 at the age of 73. There are many other women with notable accomplishments, not only in architecture, but also in urban planning and landscape design. From Rose Standish-Nichols to Jane Thompson, the list is impressive, and there's so many women that worked at the forefront of great design in the city. I dare not list them all for fear of overlooking significant contributors. However, I will mention one because we also have a sort of special, you might say urgent, connection to the world of women and design. I had only been at the Massachusetts Historical Society about 3 weeks when I received the shocking news that 40% of our collection, which is stored off-site in a depository that's owned by Harvard, well, we were being kicked out. Let's just speak it plainly. No, Harvard needed the space, and they said, you know, will you remove your collection? And so after we were sort of shocked, we realized it was a great opportunity to solve programmatic problems and would bring our collection, one of America's finest, 14 million items, all together in one place. Don't know how the story is going to end, but we do know that we have friends, and one of them is Ann Beha from Ann Beha Group. And if we don't know how the stories end, she's helping us tell the tale. In other contemporary news, the Harvard Graduate School of Design has just appointed Sarah Whiting as their new dean, making her the first female dean in the school since its founding in 1936. So proof, really, that significant strides are being made every day. So let's get to this evening's program. We have a fantastic panel of speakers from you. All of their bios are in the programs in their seats, so I will not reiterate their lengthy accomplishments. But just quickly introduce them. Regan Shields Ives is a principal at Feingold Alexander Architects. Mikyoung Kim is the founding principal of Mikyoung Kim Design. Tamara Roy is a principal at Stantec Architecture. And Justine Orlando is project manager for Shawmut Design and Construction. Our moderator for the discussion this evening will be Elise Couture-Stone, who is active with the Boston Preservation Alliance's Young Advisor Board. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Panelists, let's start with your individual journeys. Tell us a bit how you got into the design fields. Do you think you followed a traditional path to your current position, or did you arrive at it in a more unique way? And Tamara, we'll start with you.
You didn't tell me I was going to start. Oh, sorry. That's okay. And how many minutes do I have?
2 to 3 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I think about my life in decades, and because each one seems so different from the next. So I actually, from my year 1 to 10, it was, obviously your childhood's very formative. Mine was in a family with very low income. My mom had me at 19, my brother at 20, but she believed in education, and she went to night school, yay mom, while she had 2 kids. And my dad also went to night school at Northeastern, drove from New Hampshire into Boston twice a week to get his degree. So they instilled in me this amazing, interest in education. The second decade, teenagers, my family imploded. My parents divorced, and they said neither one of them wanted to support me to go to college. I had no money. I wanted to be a painter, so that was not going to work. My dad clearly said, "We are not the Medicis. We cannot support you." So I went to Carnegie Mellon because that was a name that had a lot of money. And they gave me a big grant, and I got a lot of loans, and I got through that. The next decade, 20 to 30, was for me learning, travel. I went to graduate school in Europe at an international think tank in Amsterdam because the tuition was $4,000 a year. If I went to Harvard, it was going to be basically a home mortgage by the time I was done. And I went with my husband. The other thing about that decade is the so important thing is finding my life partner, who is my husband, who's totally supportive, and we'll talk about that later. So there was that, and also winning the Roach competition, which was a travel scholarship. I got $15,000 to travel around the world. So, part of my story is really being very scrappy and trying to figure out how to do a lot with very little. So then for the 30s, I had 2 kids. So being a mom and also trying to climb the ladder in my firm was a very difficult balance. And we're going to talk about challenges later with that. But at the end of my 40s, I decided I would run for the BSA president. And that was just a totally amazing experience. Now I'm in my 50s, and I've realized that things shift again in that decade. And I've decided I'm not focusing as much on myself and my own career as I am on trying to help others. So I accepted a teaching position at Mass Art for a tenure track faculty. And we can talk about that later as well. But so, you know, all of these pieces sort of come together for me to always try to have, you know, be able to live up to my potential, but also, you know, don't sacrifice that home life, because from a broken family, the first priority for me actually was to try to create a whole family. And so that's sort of the threads in my career. That
That's
I do
really
2 minutes.
inspiring. That's really wonderful. Okay. Yeah, Mikyoung, we'll have you go next.
Well, I am a child of immigrant parents. My parents emigrated here from South Korea. I was the only minority in my whole school when I was growing up, until I went to high school when there were a few Southeast Asians in the school. But I grew up kind of learning how to be a cultural anthropologist, I think, is watching how my parents, who brought South Korea from the 50s to this little house that we lived in, and going to school every day and kind of seeing the melange of freedoms that we have here in the US, and trying to be a kind of mediator between these two cultures. But I think for me, there were kind of two moments. One was, I guess, when I was 21, and if you had told me that I would be sitting here kind of telling everybody about design and talking about that, I would have laughed, because I studied music quite seriously, and I was planning on becoming a pianist, and I had developed tendinitis in my left arm, and so suddenly I had to stop playing music and find another pathway. And so if anyone has a 20-year-old as a child in the audience, you know that's a very emotional time. And so it took me 2 years to find my way towards design, and it's again a longer conversation of what's the connection between design in the civic realm and performance and music, but I think there's actually a very close connection. I'd say the other really important kind of catalytic moment in my life was when I think I was in my mid-20s. I was offered a teaching position at the Rhode Island School of Design. I was living out in San Francisco. I had just gone to Mexico and sold all my clothes and came back wearing kind of Oaxacan clothes. I'd grown my hair really long, gotten a tan, and I looked like all the kind of petite Mexican women in Oaxaca, and I thought, and so I'd gotten this letter saying, we invite you to apply to this job at the Rhode Island School of Design. I think I was 24 at the time, and I was like, are you kidding me? Because I'm generally a very private person, and the thought of kind of talking to lots of people about design seemed really like a mistake, and it was a miracle that I was offered the position, and it was really an important foundational moment for me, because it gave me economic security, gave me health insurance, and allowed for me to actually start a practice.
I want to hear more about that story. That sounds fantastic.
It's hard to picture, given that you're so tailored.
Yeah. Justine, we'll have you go next.
I'll send you a picture.
I know we're getting a little tight on time already, so I'm going to kind of jump a little faster. Basically, my grandfather was a contractor, my father was a contractor, and so I'm a contractor. So once I finished up my co-ops at Wentworth, I joined a masonry subcontracting firm here in Boston, and I was actually their first female project manager in their 100 years of business, which was pretty challenging, but also pretty rewarding. Throughout that time, I really found that I really valued respect, and that was something I was constantly chasing after, whether or not I was right. The time there, it had challenges as working in the field, as well as trying to establish myself as a manager as well. Then about 6 years later, I joined Shawmut Design and Construction, where I'm a project manager currently. And I've really been able to use a lot of those challenges that I overcame in the masonry subcontracting world to really build the type of management style that I have, which is really based on collaboration. And that collaboration really proves success, and I think that through that, my teams and my clients give me back that respect that I've always wanted from others.
So my career took a very direct, straight path. I decided in second... No, he wasn't. But I decided in second grade after a family trip that I wanted to be an architect. And fortunately, I had no idea what that really meant because I probably wouldn't have gone through the whole process. But it was just this thing that I knew I wanted to do, and it really kept me focused. So, growing up, I did sort of what all kids do, played with Legos. But I just always had that eye on the prize. So I went to, undergrad, and I majored in architecture, and then I took 2 years off to work in Chicago and sort of use that as my playground. And then I went back to grad school, and then moved here to Boston, and was really trying to find my way in the Boston architectural profession. And fortunately for me, I was connected with a really great mentor who's actually here today, Jim Alexander, through the BSA, because I was really trying to find the right place, the right home in Boston. And as it turns out, I did end up landing at Feingold Alexander Architects, where I've been for about 15 years. And I think my perspective on the industry has changed a lot, since from what I thought being an architect was. I've learned a lot. And I've also experienced, a lot of the challenges that I think we'll talk in more detail about today that, again, had that second grade person known, how difficult it is to navigate this profession. I think, a lot of working moms have a lot of the same challenges, but I think design and architecture and construction do tend to bring, different challenges. So I'm looking forward to having some of these conversations this evening.
Well, great. Well, let's move on to some of your favorite projects. Tell us about some of your favorite projects from over the years. What were some of the challenges each of you had to overcome to get to where you are in the field today? And Mikyoung, we're starting with you this time.
Great. Well, all of my projects are our favorite. I think projects are like your children almost. It's and it's hard for me to answer that question directly. Which project is my favorite? But I can say this, that I've learned from experience that really good projects, great projects, they emerge out of the collaborative spirit with great clients. I really believe that without a good client, you cannot make a good project. And so, I'm just trying to see. Okay, so this kind of, you'll see up here a combination of different kinds of projects, and I think we kind of put that together because our practice is built on this notion of diversity. We started our practice with this notion of kind of the kitchen sink. We would just try all these different things, and it's really been rewarding because we do, for example, right now we're designing tableware for Swarovski crystals, and we're also designing, the top left is multi-acre botanic garden in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so it's just, I think creativity is all kind of coming from the same source. And so our clients, we're lucky enough to find these great clients, and they have really given us 2 decades of really amazing experiences. The only last thing that I want to say, and I don't know what my time limit is, but I think that when I look at these projects, it's not just a political statement to say, I can't say which project is my favorite, because when I look at the project, it's not just about the project itself or the success of the project, but I feel the memory of the experience of building that project and the relationships that I built with them. And so it's really, it's a kind of walk down memory lane to see each of these projects, and so that's why I think it's hard for me to choose one favorite, but it's you know, it's kind of gift.
Okay, Tamara, I think you're next.
Okay, I'm waiting for the slide to come up. Oh, here we go. So I guess I can say my favorite project, which is on the left. It's the Mass Art Treehouse. And the reason it's my favorite project, I also, all of my projects feel like they're my babies, but that one in particular was a turning point because it had, you know, my career was sort of, I don't know, moving along, doing projects, responding to clients, and suddenly at the interview for this project, Kay Sloan, the president at the time of Mass Art, sort of stopped the interview, and because I had said something like, we want this project to be collaborative. And she said, how collaborative can you make this? And you know, everybody else on our team sort of froze, and I said, as collaborative as you want. And she said, good, because, you know, we are really this like kind of crazy house of all of these artists, and every artist has their own idea about what this building should be. And so we need to draw all these people in under the tent. And the only way to do that is to engage them. And so we developed this project, this process together of being able to have first benchmarking tours with a whole committee about what are great residence halls around the country, then focus groups with the students who live in their residence halls right now, then an 80-person charrette with their students, the alumni, the Boston Redevelopment Authority, Wentworth, you know, their board of trustees. It was just everybody breaking into groups about what should the landscape be like, what should the exterior be like, what should the rooms be like, what should the common spaces be like, and just sort of taking all of that and then being able to say, okay, now that we have all of that, how can we create a vision that's going to kind of hold it all? And so, you know, we came up with this Gustav Klimt painting, The Tree of Life, and they saw in that all the little birds were them. And it was a, you know, it became a color palette, it became a way to do the inside, all this stuff. And for me, back to the woman thing, like the fact that she was unafraid, you know, and in fact, she was a consensus builder kind of president.
Absolutely.
And she was my first woman client, because I usually work with private developers, and they're almost all male. In fact, they are all male. Right? And so I'm usually in this dynamic where I'm trying to convince them to open up their process, to allow more voices in, and the reason that they see value in my participation is because I'm comfortable and I'm open and I'm flexible and I'm asking for that, and I'm telling them that this is going to be better for them if they listen first and design second rather than...
Of course, because you have a unique perspective also to
Right.
offer. Yeah.
So anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, Regan, I believe you're next.
I too had a hard time picking, you know, three of my favorite projects or even my ultimate favorite. But this range of projects really represents a different stage of where I was in my career. And on the project on the far left, the Penny Savings Bank, was a real turning point for me. It was the first time that I took a project from design through construction. So I learned so much from this project, but it was also a time when I was studying for my exams. I was building a house with my husband and starting to think about you know, getting married. So there was just a lot happening outside of my world, in my professional world, but it was a really exciting project. And one of the first projects that I really you know, felt like I could leave my mark on. The center project was also a really exciting project for me. This is the UMass Chapel at University of Amherst, or University of Massachusetts Amherst, the old chapel. And this was a really pivotal project as well. It was actually during this time that I became a principal at the firm. And so I started to take on a real different role for the firm, representing this project to the client. So it was, it was a real learning experience about how to navigate the client and how to represent the firm. And I was really excited and proud of the outcome of that project. And then the far right is a project that I'm just in the beginning stages of now. It's a new school in Leicester, Massachusetts. And this is, education is a really important part of my background, and I'm really excited about being involved with projects, designing schools, because I think really creating spaces for students to come together and to learn is really important and really exciting. So we're in the very early stages of this project. It's slated to finish in 2023, so who knows where I'll be at that point. But so that really kind of summarizes, some of the important work that I've done and just the experiences that I've had during that process.
Fantastic, thank you. Justine, you're up next.
Sure. So similar to Regan, I picked out 3 projects that had major milestones in my development through being a manager. The first project is the Abbott Hall up in Marblehead. It was a historic preservation of that clock tower. That's where I was it was my first project where I was the lead while I was with the masonry company as a prime contractor. It was a challenging job because I was acting as both project manager and superintendent, as well as running about 22 guys in the field during that project. One other just quick note about that one that folks in this room might find interesting is that in the hall itself where we would have our OAC meetings was the original Spirit of 1776 painting, also known as like the Yankee Doodle painting. So it was just kind of, it was impressed upon you as you were having these meetings. But and then after I joined Shawmut, the project down here in the corner is a theater for a prestigious academic group in Cambridge. And that was the first project where I was really challenged to have difficult conversations with the team, with the clients. We were logistically in a very tight spot. We were kind of bookend between an active railroad, high-end power line, or high-voltage power lines, a series of other issues, including having to take down Cambridge trees. And so at the end of the day, the client was really thrilled with that level of transparency and able to come to the table with some of these challenges and work through solutions. And then that very generic photo up in the corner is also for another Cambridge academic institution for a job that I'll be mobilizing next month. This is pivotal for my career. This is where I will be the lead project manager on a $40 million gut renovation, expansion, and addition project. In addition, that's going to be a pretty big milestone for that particular campus as well. It's primarily brick and stone, and they've actually brought in a New York City-based architect to bring in kind of more new age building materials of glass and exposed steel and metal panels. So it will also be a pretty big impact for the campus as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about diversity. So one of the key elements of building and sustaining a diverse pipeline of candidates is encouraging a wider range of students to enter architecture school. Part of this is creating affordable programs where graduates can enter the field without having to sustain crushing debt. To this end, how have gender equity, diversity, and inclusion evolved over the course of your careers? What advancements have you seen across the field for women and people of color? And Tamara, since you work at a Mass Art, why don't we start with you?
I think Mikyoung and I have scripted this before, and she's actually going to start. Is
Oh,
it still
great,
okay?
okay.
Okay.
All right.
I taught for 19 years at the Rhode Island School of Design. I retired, I think, like 7 or 8 years ago. And so I've watched young women kind of apply, consider various schools, advise them, help teach them what design meant, because RISD is a very collaborative program, so I taught many kinds of design there. And then I've kept up with many of them as they've had children, and it's a very difficult time it's that moment of graduating and moving into the professional world. It's a very kind of 23 to 33 is a very difficult period of time for women. And I think the good news is there's this richness of options that women have now that if I just think back on my mother's generation, that she didn't have. If she was growing up today, she'd be a highly successful professional in something. And I think that I can see that in the trajectory of my life, but I think it's hard for younger people who are graduating to see that. But I was thinking on the car ride over here that, you know, social change, like gender equity, diversity, it's in a democracy is very slow. Because we don't do mind, you know, we can't go into everyone's mind and make them think a certain way. And I was thinking about, I saw Obama talking about how, I think he was talking about gay rights and sexual equality. And he was saying how it's like turning an ocean liner around, that it's this very slow process and everyone's very impatient about it. I think of it like that, and I also think of it like dancing, that you take one step forward and you think you're moving forward, and then there's like 2 steps back, and then you 1 step forward. But in my professional career, I have seen a lot of change, and I think I think that change is happening more quickly now, and so I think it's a great time. I think the statistics, the last thing I want to say is, statistics are really depressing, you know, they are really depressing, but I don't think they tell the whole story. And I think women have the right to live many different kinds of lives, to make their own story. And I have watched anecdotally many women choose to opt out, not necessarily because of the financial burdens, but because they love being a mom. And then I see some women 3 months after having a child, they just can't wait to get back to work. That was me. That was me too. And I just want to say, I think progress is when we can all say, it's okay. You know, either choice is okay. There's no cognitive research out there that shows that if you place your child at a very young age in childcare or daycare, that there's any impact on their health or their cognitive growth. And then vice versa, if there's a kind of bond that you want to make as a mother, great, you know. And so I think there is no right and wrong, and those statistics worry me a little bit because there is an implication that there isn't, that women aren't making choices.
Success equals total parity, right?
That's right, that's right. And I think what's great is that women have choice now, and I think once you have a child, I've watched my friends and colleagues, they know right away. Like within a month, you can tell whether they're going to go back to work or they're going to stay at home. And I don't think it's as clean. There's financial issues, but I just wanted to bring that up. I think it's wonderful to see women feel confident and not guilty about the choices that they're making.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, you know, partly because, you know, I started out also lower income as well as a woman, that in the architecture profession, that was a huge hurdle to get over, because, you know, architecture is sort of it's one of the patron arts, right? And you have to have a network of people who have enough wealth to be building things. And I felt like totally uncomfortable in that world of people with wealth. I don't anymore, but I did when I started. And in fact, my very first job interview was the man across the table from me. I had said, I spent the summer building my in-laws' porch. So I had this great construction experience, and, I wanted to use that to do architecture. And he reached over and he looked at my hands, right? And he touched my hand, okay, which, like, this is not the Me Too movement, but if it was, oh my God, right? I would have never taken that job. He touched my hand, he looked at my fingernails, and he said, "You're not telling me the truth. You couldn't have these fingernails and be doing construction work." Right? And I was just like, I wear gloves, But you could tell that, one, he had never done construction, and two, there was this, patriarchal, treatment of me. And all of that, sexism, everything. And, I actually did take that job, and I did enjoy that job, and he wasn't as bad as he sounds in this, story. And he came a long way with me, actually. In fact, he would tell some of the clients not to hit on me. Because as a young woman, that's one of the other things that you struggle with, is that the clients, start to think that, I don't know, it's just horrible. There's so many different bad stories about that. But in any event, what I wanted to focus on was actually the picture that's up here, which is, sort of having known that feeling of being left out and being invisible and trying to fight to be more visible and be taken seriously as an architect, gave me this incredible empathy toward Black women who, I talk about a triple whammy, especially Black women who don't have a lot of money. And this is one of the statistics that shocks me. February 27th, 2019, finally reached 400 Black women licensed architects in the country out of 19,000. Okay, so that is 0.4% of our, and it's just disgusting to me, right? So as the president of the BSA, we did our own diversifying of our board while I was there and even prior to me. And I don't think I have time to tell that story, right? No? Anyway, but to me, the biggest impact that I'm making now, really, in my life is these are some of my grad students at MassArt. And they, they're there because they're struggling economically, but they, are so talented. They may not have had the best educations getting to that point, and so we have to work on everything from sort of writing to speaking to all of that. And we have so many conversations about, the first interview you have and, all of this. But, and there's so much that I share with them and role model that I felt exactly the same way. I felt like I did not belong, and somebody was going to call me out that I didn't belong, but just keep going, stand your ground. You do belong in this profession. You fight for it. You be what you need to be, in this life. And they're amazing men and women, and, they just deserve a chance, and they deserve to be made welcome.
Well, that actually brings us to our next topic. So talking about women in leadership. In your experience, are Boston architectural and design firms receptive to women in leadership roles, both in staff positions and board appointments? Data from the 2018 Equity in Architecture Survey shows that women and people of color are underrepresented in salary and leadership. So I'm curious to hear each of your perspectives on women in leadership, equitable paths to advancement, and why you think the design field really struggles to advance more diverse applicants. And Regan, you want to start?
Sure. I think that I have to recognize that there was a lot of work done before I got into the profession. When I was in school, it was pretty 50-50 as far as women and men in the program. And I know that it wasn't always like that. And when I started as an architect, I did look around and see that there were clearly more men in leadership roles. But as I've advanced in my career and I've looked around and I've seen my peers emerge, into the profession, I have witnessed that there are more and more women leaders. There's certainly not enough, and I think diversity is still a challenge in that respect. I do think that, and I experienced it myself as far as, emerging as a leader when I had my child, my son, who's 8 now, but there was a period of time in my career in the early stages. I think that 0 to 3 is just, it's a brutal one. And I started finding myself thinking about, what else could I maybe consider doing?
Yeah.
But, and I did look. I looked at, I don't know, I was swinging at everything. And fortunately, there was nothing that I was interested in. It was always, I always wanted to be an architect. So thank God for that second grader in me. But it's a real thing. I mean, it is a real struggle to, deal with childcare and being, away from them, during the day or having these demands. It never really stops. So it's a challenge, but I think fortunately there are more women around the table now, and we are, starting to make changes in policy that I think that makes it easier to be a mom. I think everybody's experiencing more flexibility in the workplace that allows us to still, get the job done. And do what we want to do, in terms of caring for our families, or even if you don't have a child. I mean, people have other lives that really help, make them who they are. And I think the workplace has become a lot more supportive of that. I mean, I think we still have a way to go. I know we have conversations at our office about flexibility, and some people are afraid of it. Everyone thinks they're just going to, not work anymore and, fudge their timesheets or something. But, and I think one other thing that I wanted to point out, I think in Boston, we do have a very strong women in design group, women principals group. So I think that, strength in numbers, and I really have felt the support of these communities, and I think that we just really have to pull together and support each other. And I don't know if Boston's in a bubble. I can't speak for what's happening in the rest of the country, but I do feel like, we always do tend to be a little bit on the leading edge. So I hope that this is just a continuation, and we'll just see this continue to evolve.
I think on the construction side, we're not there just yet, but we're getting there as well. It's something that we see a lot on the construction side is really that unconscious bias where you want to work with, you want to mentor, you want to promote, and you want to trust the same people that look exactly like you. So in construction, that's straight white men. And until we're able to really breach that barrier, it's going to keep, kind of staying in that bubble. So I think really finding a way to breach that barrier is really what's going to be able to make positive change in that. I know at our organization, we really saw that we weren't doing enough to even the playing field for promotions between men and women. And so we had to take a big step back and really look at what we were doing. And after a lot of consultants came in and told us exactly what we were doing wrong. They basically overhauled a lot of our basic practices and also started the DLC, which is supporting that same initiative throughout our company. And in doing that, we now have appointed our first female board member. We also are being led internally by 2 incredible women for our Chief People Strategies Officer, and just making sure I get their titles right, Chief Marketing Officer as well. And then on the construction side, even more exciting actually, one of our executives that was here in Boston actually just moved to open our 9th office in Chicago as a director, as well as another incredible woman that was here in Boston with us was promoted to Vice President for Tri-State in New York, and she has done some incredible work to help promote women. And what I'm finding is that as these women are becoming more visible in these critical positions, is that more women are being looked at for promotion, and even more women are self-advocating for themselves for these promotions, which in some aspects can be just as important. One other thing I think that needs to be noted is that we really need this type of change to be a lifestyle change. This is not a crash diet, and we none of us can expect that these type of changes would happen at a company level or an organization level overnight. And if we can all kind of start to see that and not get, to some extent, people get really angry about it sometimes, that people aren't making enough change fast enough, but just to keep in mind that, it is a process and we'll get there.
Thank you. So one of the common threads I've been hearing tonight is about motherhood. So let's sort of switch the conversation over to the motherhood penalty and the pay gap. So while caregiving affects both men and women are often, as you've been saying, disproportionately penalized for their role in this process. Data from the 2018 Equity in Architecture survey shows that 5% of their male respondents, who were fathers, reported being their child's primary caregiver, while 44% of mothers reported providing most of their child's care. The AIA study also noted that caregiving responsibilities were determined based on income. Now, this is particularly significant because the men surveyed substantially out-earned the female respondents who had a secondary caregiving role. So this suggests that if there is to be more parity among men and women in the design fields, then pay equity and caregiving issues should actually be addressed in tandem. So talk to us a little bit more about this issue that clearly has been taking place, and certainly you have been mentioning as a thread in tonight's conversation. And yeah, I guess we'll start with Tamara.
Well, I think that I chose my life partner, who is also an architect. His name is BK, because he was progressive and he totally accepted me as his equal. And so I thought that was, the way we were going to go through life as equals. And then, what I didn't really take into account was that he was 5 years older than me, and which is very common in relationships. And so then, once we got to sort of deciding to have kids, suddenly we looked at his income and his earning potential and my income, and it was very clear if there was going to be someone who was going to take some time off or, work a shorter work week and do flex time and everything, that was going to be me. And, again, I told you my background, my family imploded in divorce, and so I also had that need myself, and I don't want to make an excuse for it. Like, that was really important that our family had a center, a person who, was that center, and that was going to be me. So I did definitely take pay cuts, pay hits. I worked less hours. I couldn't climb as fast as he could climb. But I don't want to say that was bad. I really, sometimes I would sit back and look at the stress that he was under, right? Because men, I think, really part of their self-worth is providing for their families. And especially since, our family had to weather the recession, which hit, for 5 years, the architecture profession so hard, and we worried. We put, there were so many things we did to try to protect our family, and the stress of just bringing home the bacon for me was I'm so glad that he carried that. And
burden.
And then I carried the family burden. So again, I'm back to your point. It's being able to have two. Yeah. No. Maybe we said we were going to kind of do this. This one maybe more as a back and forth conversation.
Yeah, so Regan is part of this conversation too. Yeah.
I think one of the things that we are trying to do is really change the cultural landscape at our firm, and we are now a woman-owned business, which that happened about 2 years ago, which was a big shift in the leadership of the firm. Not that we didn't have a supportive, owners before, but we started looking at how we might do things differently. And one of the things that we did was we literally rewrote the rules, the office manual. We took a hard look at some of the language and some of the policies. So we changed the maternity leave to parental leave, and we actually instituted, a month of paid leave for either, men or women. And interestingly enough, since 2015, since we instituted that, the people that have taken advantage of this benefit were 80% men and 20% female. So we just had our first woman, take maternity leave. So I think what was really interesting about that is it's now not, putting the onus on just the women being out of the office for an extended period of time. And I think that just starts to change the fabric of how people perceive, raising children. And, just by, ingraining it into the policies of the firm, we're saying, it's okay and it's actually expected that you are, the men are, home taking care of the children so that maybe their wives can go back to work earlier or, however they want to use that time. But I think that, as we start to think about doing things a little bit differently, and as Justine said before, I think, we're going to continue to move the needle, in slower steps, but I think if we just see these changes happening, then we can do whatever we can to try to level the playing field.
Thank you both. So before going on to the last question, why don't we actually open up this conversation to the audience and see if anyone has any questions? And if you do, please just stand up and speak a little bit louder. I can take this one. Oh, okay. We'll wait for Gavin. Questions?
I actually just want to talk a little bit more about what Regan was just saying, because it made me think that we focus so much on women and how to give more empowerment to women. But at least in my household, in order for me to do that, I need my husband to be home.
Yes.
And so I think we need to find ways to empower men to be give them more space and latitude to be home, so that women can stay late at events and serve on panels and things like that. So how do we do that? Men.
Well, I think it's a great point, because I think the percentage of men who stay at home is still, I think there is discrimination against men who are stay-at-home fathers. Honestly, I think that they, in the playground, we have a good family friend who, for 7 years, he stayed at home. His wife worked when his kids were young, and he felt like an outsider. He was the only woman in the playground, and so I think changing that dynamic. I have heard some women complain that men need to get better at housekeeping, but I think in general that that those perceptions have to change in order, because that balance is a really important thing. I do want to say, because I think I've built a design firm from scratch as a founding principal. And so, and it's possible to do. I have a 20-year-old son. I'm picking him up tomorrow from college. He's finishing his sophomore year. And there are some very hard choices you have to make. But I got very little sleep. It is that 0 to 3 year where you don't get any sleep. And I had a long talk with someone in my office who, she had just had a child, and she just said, I can't do this anymore. And I just told her, you just stick it out for another year and it will get better. And that was last year. I said, didn't it get better? And it gets better. But it is hard. Even when they're in high school, it's not easier. And so you do have to work harder. I hate to say it, but you have to show up. I still do this because it's an old habit. I go to bed around 1:30. I wake up at 5:30. And it was hard enough for me to retire from RISD. So I got rid of one job because I was principal of a firm. I was raising a child. And there were some personal reasons why I was forced to do that. I was forced to confront the insanity of my life. And so, but I want to say to any young man or young woman who's an emerging professional in the audience, it is possible. And now it's so easy because like I don't have a child at home. I can kind of travel, I can do all these things, but for about 6 or 7 years, it was very, very difficult. And I think if you can push through that period of time, you'll be very grateful when you're our age. You know. Wow. Okay.
Right on time. Any other questions?
So I do work in the field a lot in construction. I'm an architect, and so one of the big things that I've come up against just in different stages is how do you kind of overcome those labels? You know, women are often labeled as flighty or a bitch or I don't know, not communicative, communicating too much, over wordy. How have you kind of pushed past that in your own experience?
Gender judo.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think for myself, I've definitely witnessed that, especially when I was on the masonry side in the subcontractor world, where at 22, these guys had no need for me whatsoever. And I think you really just need to, one, be able to build up confidence in yourself and what you're saying. Because if you're coming across as confident, it's almost like who cares about what they are feeling. And I think that the more confident that you can be, the more it suffocates them. So I know it's something that you kind of have to do all on the inside versus how it's affecting, you know, the outside world. But that's something that I've done in the past, and it has seemed to work for me.
We had this exact question come up 2 days ago in our emerging leaders lunch, and it's one that young women struggle with all the time, especially in the contractor meetings, because their goal is basically to make you feel invisible or useless or stupid or whatever, right? And who knows, like, why they wake up in the morning and just say, like, let's just make the young woman in the room feel like crap, right? And you know, the answer is usually try to be more confident, which I agree, like, as you can build it up over time. But the strategy that I felt like worked for me back when I was that age in the trailer with the guys was actually to be my authentic self, which is to say, you know what, I'm still learning. And I actually just tried to ask a lot of questions and draw them into a dialogue about, you know, why are you doing this and why are you doing that? And first they would start out as sort of, oh, I can like mentor this woman, you know, or whatever. Like there's like a grandfatherly hierarchy that develops. But then, like, I think at some point they realized that I would turn it on them, and I knew the drawings better than they did. And, you know, that's part of it is like making sure that you're extra prepared and you're extra knowledgeable, and suddenly, you know, you've asked 10 questions, but you then say, this is the way that, you know what, we need to do it because this is in my client's best interest. And they're like, huh? You know, and I think that being able to not pretend that you're more confident than you are, but be honest at the same time as knowing that, you know, you're prepared is a good way.
You gain trust by doing a really good job.
Right.
You know, that's something you do have to work harder. You can't just walk in the room and that, you know.
Have instant credibility.
It might be unfair, but, you know, I've just learned the world is not fair, and so to kind of just work harder, do a good job, then you at the local level are not just making a change for yourself, but you're making change for all young women. And so people say, like, all the statistics, how do you globally change that 40% or the 60%? And I think one important way we all do that is by every day just getting a person who, when they see woman, they think all of those words you said, to change their mind for 5 minutes. I think the impact of that is unmeasurable. And so I just think there's incremental change that that we all can make, both men and women, and in our perceptions. But I do say to women, I heard a story, there's a woman who's just stepped into she's the first head of surgery at MGH, and a close friend of mine asked her, well, like, what would you say to these women? And she just said, to show up every day. Mm-hmm. Don't take any shit, and just show up every day and do your job really, really well.
Well, the other thing that I also want to point out too, though, and that came up in our lunch, which I really appreciated from one of the male principals, was he said to this young woman, and remember that you are not alone, right? You are part of our firm. And if you're having a problem with someone, you can come to me and I will support you. Or, you know, he said, like, he noticed that when the designer principal showed up at the site, that suddenly all the contractors tried to ask all the questions to him instead of the very competent woman who had been on this team for the entire time. And he, even in that moment, supported her and just said, don't ask me. She's the expert. She's the one who knows what she's talking about. I'm just here, you know, to take a glance at it every couple of months. And so, you know, he redirected that question, and So, and, you know, we need that. We need
that's a great way to support colleagues. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
As well. We can't fight it by ourselves.
Yeah, no, we definitely need men's help with this. So I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
I'm curious if kind of similar to that question, like, so I graduated my master's degree, and now I'm working at my first firm, and it's like a really small firm, which is, there's pros and cons to every job. So I'm curious if you guys have ever witnessed discrimination towards you, and how that might, like, my mom's advice is always like, take it sometimes. You just gotta take it, and then you just gotta like be the bigger person. And I think there's value to that, but then there's other moments when you're just like witnessing it very blatantly. Like, to be working at a place for a very long time and then have like a new person come in and be given a lot more like value. And it's really hard to like not jump to the conclusion of like, oh, this is because I'm a woman, or like, oh, this is because X, Y, and Z, and like you feel like you're holding a bunch of stuff in. Like, how do you overcome that? Or like, do you have examples or whatnot?
I don't know, start. But I think that, you know, I used to be shy, and also I found it early on in my career very hard to react in the moment. Like, you just, you know, somebody does something to you and it's discriminatory and it feels like a body blow, and you feel it physically in the moment, but there's no way that you're in a position where you can turn it around and say something clever, you know, or knock them on their feet, or, you know, whatever. You're just stuck with it later, like, oh, I wish I said X, Y, Z, right? And actually, so I think that's very normal, and you can acknowledge that everybody feels that way. And so for me, like, the way to resolve it was actually to process it, think about it, and then if it was a person that I was going to have to deal with all the time, to actually approach them afterwards and, did I get this right? You know, is this what you were insinuating? Or, you know, is this the situation? Always like sort of with questions and trying to get down to the meat of what is happening. And if you need to help the person re-understand, you know, or change their mindset, then you can do it in that way, rather, because in the moment is really hard.
Yeah, because I think we're living in a world right now which is really divisive and worrisome to me. I mean, the best of, I'm a representation of the best of what America can be. My parents fled the Korean War to come here, and they gave me a life where I'm sitting at this table, and as Tamara's story is a similar thing. And I think what I've learned as I've gained confidence is that I don't think everything is, when I was younger, I used to think, oh, that person just doesn't like me because I'm Asian or something. And I've learned actually that, first of all, that I don't think a lot of situations, when I look back on them, were actually malicious. But I think that when I have developed more confidence to be able to actually communicate and also try to understand the other person's point of view, like why did they do that, and what are their motivations, so that before I even go into the conversation, I kind of have already had a little, I do it sometimes aloud in the car, and you know, people think I'm crazy because I'm just trying to figure out, like, why are they doing this? And I don't jump immediately to because they're racist or because they are against women. I try
Or
to.
it must be about me.
It must be about me.
Actually,
I try
really
to
them.
be empathetic and to open up a line of dialogue. It doesn't always work. You know, there are some people who do have a problem. But I have found that it has helped me immensely to try to be empathetic and to say, why did this happen, and where is this other person coming from, and how can I help to start to resolve this? Because I do feel like in the culture we're living in right now, whatever political affiliation you have, we can all admit that it's a place where people are yelling at each other too much. And I think that it's a time when things are changing slowly, but they are getting better. They're definitely getting better. I mean, I was at a meeting on Tuesday. I was at a morning meeting with a developer, and I was the only woman in the whole room. There were probably
all the
11
time.
or
Still.
12.
Still.
Right, and I didn't actually notice it. Was my associate, who was a man, who said, you know, Mikyoung, you were the only woman in the room. And then we went to a trustees meeting, which is now being headed by a woman for the first time, and it was all women in the room. And it wasn't until I went into the room with all women that I said to them, wow, I just was in a meeting with all men. And so things are changing, be patient, but also I try to think optimistically and not jump to the conclusion that the person is against you, because that's what I used to do when I was younger and didn't understand things. And I think it can be healthier for you, you know. Because the last thing I want to say is I was on a plane the other day, and you know how the pilot says, put your mask on before you put it on your child? And I always just never really listened to it, but I was thinking about today, and I was thinking all the things you do, especially if you're an emerging professional, put your mask, like take care of yourself first. Like, what do you need? And is it best for you to get angry and to kind of boil over? And, you know, so it's just to try to figure out what it is for you to kind of take care of yourself first.
Although if we had more time, I think we'd ask you for more details about that situation. Because, I mean, there are certain points, you know, I know where, like, we can all be sensitive and empathetic and try to resolve it. But if there's really a situation where there's bias going on, you know, which I know I've experienced, I've walked away from firms where there was just, you know, it just wasn't going to be my job in life to re-educate somebody to come around. You know, I was just like, this is not my job. I want to go to a place that is welcoming to me, that finds what I have to say valuable. And so then it's about fit, you know, if that's the case. And you just have to find a place that actually fits you. And there are some, I would say, architecture firms that, you know, just are not that. And, you know, you can push the rock uphill, or you can just move on.
That's right. But you know, the best revenge is success, right? So people can tell you when you're younger this or that, but if you're successful in your own definition of success, that's the best revenge, right?
Yeah, and I think one last thing that I would just add to this great, you know, advice is that if you could find someone, you said you're at a smaller firm, but if you could find an advocate that could really, you know, that you could have a safe conversation with, and that, you know, maybe in your absence they could, you know, speak for you or advocate for you to get those projects or to get that responsibility, I think that's really valuable. So whether that comes from within or, you know, trying to just find those people that can really champion, you know, for you, I think it helps to sort of take the mystery away from things.
So I know when, you know, people in my firm come to me and they say, you know, I wish I had more opportunity to do these things. I'm always excited when somebody wants to advocate for themselves. And so I think it's that. there are lots of people that you may not be, and I think Tamara said this earlier, you're not alone. There's lots of people who want you to stay in that firm. They want you to communicate before you decide you're going to move to another place. In general, I think that would be the case.
All right, thank you so much for your perspectives. Okay, so we have, one question left, and they've all been told to keep it to one sentence each. So looking toward the future, after all of this, what do you foresee for women in the field in the next 10 years?
I'm not answering this first.
Oh, no, me either.
Okay, Justine, we'll start with you.
Justine, very, very tangible, which I would really like to see more site-specific training for all women in any part of this industry. I find that there's a lot of women that come onto the job site that are timid or are not comfortable in their surroundings, and that gives off a perception that we don't want to have, because we are confident, we know what we're doing, we know why we're out there. So I'd really like to see more very specific training for women to come out onto job sites and be able to portray that way.
And I saw a statistic recently that, just based on college and university demographics, that AEC, so owner engineer company ownership, will be comprised of 75% women and 50% minority by 2030. So, you can believe statistics, however you want, but I'd like to see that, we can sort of stop having these conversations, and that it just becomes the norm, and that we can focus on designing and building, and it's something that we tell our grandkids about.
This old-fashioned way
Right.
that we used to be. Yeah.
Well, I would like to see the future have a more flexible model for success, both for men and for women, so that we can look inside ourselves and decide who it is we really want to be, and that the profession is open to every single person's idea of what they want their life to be.
What she said. Yeah, I recently read an article in Harvard magazine, Harvard Business Magazine, and if it's diversity isn't just the right thing to do, it's not the good thing to do, it's not the ethical thing to do, if that's not enough, it's actually now being shown that it's actually the more profitable thing to do, that they've shown that businesses that are more diverse, more inclusive, are actually more profitable, more innovative. And so, if the kind of ethical stance is not enough, then it's profitability. And I have found that actually those two things combined often instigate much faster change. So good things are about to come, I think.
Capitalism.
Yeah,
We'll use
that's
capitalism.
right. Well, it is, money is a great motivator, and I think that it is, you can't discount that. So it's great news overall, I think.
All right, that concludes the program. Thank you so much for all of your perspectives. And thanks everyone for coming out.